decisions about other people's language. Okay, we are going live now on YouTube. So I want everyone to be aware that we're on YouTube. I like to give that warning at the beginning. That way, if me or anyone else gets in trouble for what we say while we're live streaming, essentially, we at least, we at least thought about it ahead of time. All right, it's wonderful to be joined by everyone on YouTube and here in our building. Yes, this is like live streaming. We are indeed hip. We are going to be studying, of course, today is our book club. So we are, and now I lost my spots. Where the distrust of faith, is that where we are?
Yes, the beautiful and the sublime.
Okay. I have found it. Okay, so we're sharing. Anyone who needs it, I can't really change the size, I don't think, more than this, but we're starting in this block over here. So, what do we mean by the sublime? And why did Longinus maintain that man's ability to respond to it is a sign of the inward greatness of the human soul? That's an interesting question I want to pose now to you before we will obviously go over Heschel's answer to that. But I'm interested because it's such an interesting question. Two parts. What do we mean by the sublime? And why did Longinus maintain that man's ability to respond to the sublime is a sign of the inward greatness of the human soul?
To me, it's the grandeur that we can sense but don't really know. We can't capture it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
I would say that, and why that's certainly, I agree with you that that's what we mean by, you and I mean the same thing clearly when we say sublime, that it's this I sometimes refer to it as a somewhat, out of body I don't like necessarily, but like a discombobulation between the physical and the spiritual, between the soul and your physical body. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's shifting kind of perspective, sometimes it's a more mental thing, but whatever, that kind of encounter is something people have described, not in terms so concrete as to make it diagnosable or something, not something we can say, yes, we have a test that proves you've had this sublime experience, even psychologically, even diagnostically, as some kind of checklist. But the descriptions are similar enough that most people, this is one of those things, the sublime in the sublime almost, is that most people, at least that have thought about it, seem to know what you mean, even if putting it to words or tests is exceedingly difficult. And I think that's, to me at least, that's why responding to the sublime, or our ability to do so, our ability to somehow interact with it, is, I think here it's saying, is a sign of spiritual development in a way, is a sign of, are you familiar with, there's different intelligence quotients these days? Are you familiar with this? We don't just measure people's IQ, but EQ, and of course, what rabbis like to talk about when we do bother to get into this side of it is SQ, or a so-called spirituality quotient. This idea that there is a way, to measure, like you could measure other aspects of human development, how developed a soul was, in other words, and that the more developed you were, or that that we are capable of this exceeding development to be able to interact with the sublime. And that's, I think, what this is referring to, this quote. Does that make sense? Did any of that? Okay, cool. Sometimes I get on a roll and I don't always know if the train's going to come into the station.
There's also, and it's just part of the same thing, the sense of absolute awe that a tiny speck like me could be touched and moved by all of this.
Mm-hmm. And awe is a good word to use. Mm-hmm. Sorry, if you were going to continue, I want to let you do. Okay. Awe is a good word to use because it's going to come up so much as sublime is essentially the umbrella, right, for what we're going to be talking about it. Divine, sublime, whatever version of this spiritual, the boundary that you must cross to deal with spiritual things. Um, uh, and beneath that, there are going to be ways in which you can access and notice it, threads, sort of. And awe, since that word was brought up, is one of those. Is one of those feelings that allows us to access the sublime. For it's like spaghetti that comes from God, and you're like, doo, doo, like it's like, oh, I can see it and I can access it because I am connected enough to notice it. Obviously, I don't mean in some kind of Stranger Things way that there's some kind of other world. That I don't mean any of that. This is merely purely metaphor. But that is kind of how I would describe the difference in one who perceives the world in that way or tries to work on that as opposed to one who doesn't.
I'm sorry, but I would also add, at least in my experience, the fact that I have those experiences confirms to me that there is a soul.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree. I had certain experiences, encounters with the sublime when I was a child, when I was younger, which allowed me to that opened me. I only use myself as an example here because I feel that there have been a lot of questions over the last 15 years or so about whether people in my age demographic, millennials, are going to be engaged in religion. And now there's a lot of talk about how the Gen Z, Gen Alpha people may be more returning to religion, but the millennials were maybe raised at the peak of the Gen X, detachment from religion time and the kind of the cultural time of detachment from religion in a way that makes many people in my age group atheist or agnostic. Um, but I had certain experiences in this, which again served as a how can I deny what I myself have experienced? It becomes a kind of like, in a weird way, we talk a lot about proof. A lot of people, not we, Jews don't do this so much, but in America, a lot of people who talk about faith talk about proofs for it. And I always felt, which seemed, at least culturally, to be the opposite of the commonly held perspective, that evidence was on my side. Only because of these common human experiences that everyone across all of time could point to. And it's like, if you can, I'm like, you can pull a hamstring. It's like, if you can encounter the spiritual world in a way that feels as real as pulling a hamstring, then someone coming to you and saying, God isn't real because there's no there's no possible proof of an existence of this spiritual dimension, whatever you want to call that, you'd be like, next you're gonna come and tell me you can't pull a hamstring. Hamstrings aren't real. Like no, it's just a massive whatever in your body. You're a big, I don't mean to turn into one of those 90s talk radio pastors, but I'm not trying to make the argument that this should be the absolute proof of, that I'm not doing that, and neither specifically, although, I mean, again, it's when you see something as truth, it's hard to then say it's not true. It's not there if you see it that way. So, in any event, very interesting way to start off. Um, so now we're going to get Edmund Burke, who's fun. Not really. I'm not saying he's not fun. I'm just saying we're not really going to get too much of him. Since the time of Edmund A. Burke, the 18th century, essentially, the sublime has been contrasted with the beautiful. He identified the sublime with the vast, the terrible, and the obscure, which arouse the feeling of pain and terror. And the beautiful, he's essentially splitting the two things what we referred to as the sublime into two separate things, just so you understand. And he's calling one sublime and one beautiful. But for what we were just talking about, we would call both of them sublime. We would say this is all part of the same layer that I was talking about. He's saying specifically these are two. Burke was saying these are two parts. But we are not saying. I'm not saying that. You can say whatever you like. Um, which arouse the feeling of pain and terror, and the beautiful with the smooth, the small, and the delicate, which arouse a feeling of love and tenderness. Now, sorry, I'll get to the end of his thing and then I'll critique him. Um, Sublime objects are vast in their dimensions, beautiful ones comparatively small. Beauty should be smooth and polished, light and delicate. The great ought to be solid and even massive. Now, I just said I was going to critique, so I'll give you the chance, you, my students, to critique before I do. What is Burke's major failing? And hint, I believe it comes from from the time period he lives, as the Romanticists.
He doesn't see that the sublime contains both negative and positive. And he then hasn't heard some symphonies and seen some works of art that have both.
Well, so I agree with a lot of what you're saying, that as we were saying before, that it's really both together in the same layer. Well, does anyone else have something they'd like to say about Burke before I don't want to just throw my thoughts at you. We're going to get into Kant next, and then we'll talk about them together. So before we get to Kant, I just want to finish talking about Burke. I was going to say that with what we're talking about in Burke here, his attachment to this 18th century, their notions, his preconceived notions have kind of forced him into this dichotomy. And he has this very masculine, feminine dichotomy that he has broken these categories into, in which, I mean, he's named them sublime and beautiful, but go back to how he describes them. When you look at the classicists and the romanticists of the 18th century, you see very much that this belief that there should be, like, in this almost their version of a Platonic form of everything, is things broken into, it's not yin and yang, this isn't Asia. Instead, the dichotomy is masculine and feminine, essentially. And that everything, by being brought into balance with those things, including within yourself, could, I mean, this was an 18th century thing. I'm not, you don't have to, nobody today, basically. I mean, it's like many things throughout history. No, you don't have to believe it, but I think that's coloring his perspective on the sublime, is this belief that perhaps in its perfect form, it is split into these, what are essentially masculine and feminine, right? He's saying here, there's one that's solid and even massive. The other is the beautiful one's comparatively small. Beauty should be smooth and polished, light and delicate. I mean, it's the 18th century. What are we talking? I mean, he doesn't actually say feminine or masculine anywhere, but he is essentially saying both of those words with every other word you would use except for those words. So that's my critique. Don't mean to be a critical theorist or anything, but that's my. I think Burke is coming at it from that perspective. According to Kant, the beautiful is what pleases apart from all interest, and the sublime is what pleases through its opposition to the interest of sense. I actually want to see what they're quoting here. The beautiful prepares us to love something disinterestedly, even nature itself. Kind of that, like, oh, that's really nice. Right? That's what he's describing there. You've felt that before. Again, whenever we get into the sublime, you can't ever give it one definition generally. Everyone tries to give it their own. And then the best thing to do, honestly, is share to the other person, like, have you ever done this? This is what we mean. And then that's easier generally in the sublime to deal with. The sublime prepares us to esteem something highly, even in opposition to our own interest or our own sensible interest. Very interesting. How do I get back to? I don't know. Oh, I think I found it. Okay. He defines the sublime as that in comparison with which all else is small. So again, we've got this idea of the sublime as something too massive to, one of those things like a titan, or something that's just like hard for people of the time to even conceptualize. Um, it is nature in those of its appearances, the contemplation of which brings with it the idea of infinity. It is, quote, that which is beyond all comprehension great. Quote. So again, and again, you see here again, like, because again, they're going to have a masculine view of God too, and this is very much how you describe God in many senses. This version of the sublime sounds like description of divinity, at least from a Jewish perspective, right? We often say, right, God is so big, God had to practice Tzimtzum for our existence to be possible, right? Like, so we're basically talking about the most massive thing. Do we do that because we think God is masculine? I don't know. I do think it is interesting that we kind of use feminine language for God in the personal and the small. Like the bat kol, the still small voice, is feminine language. Shekhinah is a personal, like a very much hashgacha pratit, or divine intervention on a personal level, hence the feminine. What else is God? Isha milchama, right?
Man of war.
Right.
Warrior.
But so we've also, right, Adon Olam, Lord of the world, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He. So we have these it's not rare for Jews to approach things from this dichotomy, because we kind of, whether we've been influenced from the outside to whether we've adapted this. There are some people who critique any approach like this in Jewish theology or world as bringing in too much. There's always a concern, especially those who still are like, we love Maimonides because everyone loves Maimonides, but maybe he was a secret Aristotelian. There's all this worry that Aristotelian Greek stuff has like wormed its way into and needs to be like whack-a-mole out of like every little bit of Jewish interpretation ever since Mishnah Torah, because again, they're very much like Rambam was and I don't think I'll leave that to people who are much more scholars of Rambam than me. I just read it. I wouldn't say I've devoted the time to be a scholar of it at all. But in any event, those things these ideas are not totally foreign to us, is all I was indicating. While disagreeing with Burke's view that the objects of sublimity, shouldn't it be sublimity? I thought it was sublimity, but I guess it's sublimity because somebody edited this book and nobody's editing my words. So that the objects of sublimity arouse in us a feeling of fear and imminent danger. Kant insists that they must be fearful. The sublime is found only in nature, not in character, intellect, or art. Since in these, quote, human purpose determines the form as well as the size, unquote. So sublime only exists when you see a mountain.
Sunset.
Or the expanse of the sky, right? Mm-hmm. So, you go, right, big, giant thing that we couldn't possibly. Again, Kant never lived to see skyscrapers, so you know what I mean? Like, I'm sorry, I just want to say that, like, if you lived in the year 1100 and the tallest thing you'd ever seen was 2 stories high, this is a lot easier to be like, yes, it is unspeakably true that besides those rare, I don't think they thought they were aliens back then, but the pyramid, besides like these very rare wonders of right? Why do these things have the name wonders of the world? The Sphinx, the pyramids, the Taj Mahal, some of these things. Because they seem to be impossible feats of engineering for humans, and they were labeled such in times when humans were bad at building things. Quite frankly, we were building, we had dark ages and stuff. Things weren't always great. And so it's interesting to approach this as your Heschel, and you live in the time of modern marvels, when technology, thanks to two consecutive world wars, has advanced rapidly in the last 30 years, and suddenly you're not dealing with steam engines, you have, diesel engines, and you have, rocket ships, and you have well, not in the 50s, but soon, you have, before that though, you have, new alloys of steel and stuff that are light enough to be used in building skyscrapers. Again, like skyscrapers, now they started before that, but you could build them even higher because we alloyed metal. Again, I'm not the person to go to for the history of science, but I think it's interesting that these opinions are coming. He's bringing these in here, and then we're going to wrestle with them. We should wrestle with them, and Heschel will get to that as well. As moderns, as people who live in a different time than these other thinkers did, only because, not because our time is more enlightened. I argue often and vociferously that we are not, but we are more advanced technologically, which means we are more comfortable. We live longer lives. We have more abilities. I mean, seriously, go back to Kant and say, he's like, the sublime, it's this huge thing. And I'm like, really? Because I just had my robot wash my clothes and my dishes and put my kid to sleep. And you want to tell me that sublime is only mountains? Sorry, I'm being facetious for the point of what I'm saying is, as the human experience radically changes itself, which it may well do if we don't blow ourselves up in the next 20 years, this is going to seem even more remote from us in its perspective. As remote, quite frankly, as remember how throughout medieval Dark Age Europe and all that, what did all the pastors and the preachers teach and stuff? And in every place really where things have been bad. We do this ourselves in our theology around ingathering, and eventually we'll win. What is it all based in? Life is suffering and pain, but there is either another reward or we're building to something better. What happens when we've reached 75% of the way? You know what I mean? The question becomes, as we get closer to, like, what if we're filling a bar? What if we're getting closer to redemption, like 0.02% at a time, year by, you know what I mean? Like, and if you, sorry, now I'm going way off book into stuff that's really he's not talking about. So I'll curtail myself from more screaming and turn it over to you all.
The pyramids, the Empire State Building,
Yeah.
the fact that man landed on the moon. In my thinking, I say those are incredible. They stretch the limits of what we thought was possible, but I don't call them sublime.
Okay, interesting.
Technology.
Sublime has a kind of ethereal, beyond human meaning to me.
It's interesting. I just think about it in a certain way where I mean, I agree with you. I'm not saying technology is sublime. That's not what I mean to say anyway. So let me clarify and say that's not what I mean.
Okay.
I believe the sublime to be both the natural and massive and the small and beautiful. What I'm saying is, because my view of sublime is both of them, the things human beings do as we raise our quotients, all of them, our spiritual, our intelligence, God willing, our emotional at the same rate, which has been, quite frankly, our problem over the last couple decades, is our rapid microchip revolution in the 90s and the 80s and 90s, really, that has only exponentially increased in development, threatens to advance us technologically faster than we advance spiritually and emotionally. And I do believe there could be danger in that if we're not prepared for the power we'll wield to transform life as we know it. We may transform it in a way, and I say this and I don't mean to sound like a zealot, transform it in a way that God never intended for us to live. Now, I don't say that at all. You know me, I drive a Tesla. I don't say that at all to say we should be Luddites in any way, and that technology is an affront to God, because no, 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 no. Certainly, chas v'sholom, never. I think we need more technology, not less. However, I am concerned about the rise of these other things at the same rate, but that all of them rising together is part of us accessing the sublime. And so when I use the phrase of technology, I think some of what the human mind is able to create out of technological advancement gives, if not the sublime as Kant and Burke refer to it, then the beautiful as Kant and Burke refer to it. Because here's something I'll tell you, and I'm sure many of you have encountered this in different ways, especially in the world of medical technology and personal assistance technology. It's hard not to look at someone who 100 years ago would either A, be dead, or B, be without legs, born that way, or because of accident or what have you, can now just be given legs in almost every case. And the fact that you can restore a human being in such a radical way, there's something, again, when you get to the beautiful aspect of the sublime that they're referring to, there's something, I don't mean smooth and polished because it's metal, but philosophically, there's something smooth and polished about being human when you can be restored in such a way to the experience of humanity. I'm not trying to say that those who are disabled are not fully experiencing humanity, but at the same time, I mean, I'm not trying to be offensive that human beings were designed to walk on two legs, and as long as we can, we'd like to keep you doing so. That's not offensive, I hope to say. There is a default, and the fact that we can now, all the things we can do are examples of sublimity or sublimity. Sorry, I'm really not sure. Now, I'm sure it's right. Again, I shouldn't defame the book for my own. But I may not be making sense, but it's not that technology is sublime, but that technology is our ability to create technology.
We say we're made in God's image as the creator, and the fact that we can create.
And we know God loves that we create.
That's right.
Now, there are certain things God doesn't want us to create, and that's why I'm saying, it's like there are conversations that are good to have about what we should create. I think that's wise. I think God would want us to, like the Tower of Babel story that everyone across all faiths understands, I think. It would be wise sometimes to take a step back and say, let's not go too fast, too far, which to me is more the lesson of the Tower of Babel story than God being mad that people were going to meet God. Like that, I think that's the shot level that we can move past pretty easily. And as you get to deeper levels of understanding of that story, it's more about humanity outrunning its feet, essentially. And that's something I think today we should be concerned about. We don't want to outrun our feet because of the dangers we can expose ourselves to because we haven't developed certain other things enough to sense danger, right? The more spiritually attuned you are, he'll get into this too. This is where the awe part is, as like a sense comes in, that you can kind of sense danger. I'm not trying to say you become a superhuman, but like the smarter you are, the more things you can perceive, the more SQ you have, the more EQ, you can perceive things about people when they're trying to manipulate you, when they're lying to you, the more EQ you have. Can I measure your skill in detecting lie? No, I can't. But if you develop that enough, we all know you would develop that skill. You would have the ability to develop that skill. Same thing spiritually is what I'm saying. The more you develop that, the more things that could be dangers, even in things you develop, you attune yourself to and say, maybe that might be a little too hot to touch. I might want to think twice about developing that particular thing. But if you don't have the right level, you might just walk right into it saying, gee, this seems like a really great idea. Just like if you were stupid, you might touch something hot. This seems like a really great idea. It's red. Ah, right? Nobody's really that dumb, but you get my because if your IQ was really low, that's what you do, right? So it's the same thing with the other quotients we've been talking about, which I think are helpful for understanding what they're talking about here. Or not. Maybe I'm making no sense whatsoever. I only understand myself 75% of the time.
I think cloning is a fabulous example of that. It holds tremendous potential, but tremendous risks at the same time, I think.
Yes, there are many scientific areas that we probably need to think a lot more about the implications, both for civil society, and for personal identity, and for human meat markets, essentially. I mean, like, there's a lot of worries about, like, okay, growing an organ in a tube is fine. We all pretty much agree on that, I'd assume here. What if you grew a person to use them as,
or you blueprinted?
What if you grew a person, but you immediately cut off their cognitive functions in some way, cutting off something up top that made it so that they were basically brain dead from then you basically. I think that would horrify me, and I would vote against it 1,000,000,000% of the time. I would never, the thought of it makes me retch. But what if only 40% of America retches? This is why we need to, like, before, now they might, because again, 60% might say, we could defeat, who knows? What if they said the trade-off was you could defeat everything? Everyone has a donor whenever you want. In fact, we start growing one of you the second you're born, so that if you ever need something, even a whole spinal column, we can take it. What if we say every 20 years you get an insurance plan, so every 20 years we throw out the old backup and we create a new backup for you, so that you can keep replacing yourself? I mean, I don't know what's going to be possible. Some of it scares the hell out of me. I'm just saying I wouldn't limit what will be possible to my current IQ either, because in 300 years, people are going to be smarter than me. They're going to look back at me like I'm looking back at these guys saying, you don't know anything. Everything's masculine and feminine. Ugh. Right? I'm being rude to them. But 300 years from now, someone will be rude to me, and they'll look up me on the internet. They won't look up at me on the internet, but if they did, if they were, they would say, look at this idiot. He thinks everything's about whatever they think I think everything's about. But clearly it's all about the new esoteric lists. They're who knows, whatever the thought thing of the time is. So Kohelet. We keep it all. We understand it all. We take it all with a grain of salt. Yeah.
I should just tell you, because you've mentioned it so often, I reread it yesterday.
Well, good.
Discussion.
Yes, it's a very fascinating piece of wisdom literature. Yes, I will try and get that scheduled so that we can start learning Kohelet together, because it's very good. But in any event, my point being, that's kind of why Kohelet says, it's like when we start talking about this stuff, Kohelet's like, you know what, man? I was king of Israel and super duper duper smart. And I'll tell you what to do. Don't worry about it. Basically, he says, go live a good life, do what God wants you to do, have a family, enjoy stuff, enjoy the thing, because God has put all these wonderful things here for you to enjoy while you're doing your job. Like, I mean, he's like, you got a thing to do. We've all got to live a life and make a living and support a family, but also God put all these great things on earth for you to enjoy, and you should enjoy them while you're here, because we won't always be here forever, and it's more important to do that than to spend every moment worrying about all the biggest things in the world. Because Kohelet says, I was the smartest guy that ever existed, and even I could barely figure out this. And what I figured out was, just don't worry about it. Like, in the end, he's like, just don't worry about it that much. Again, I'm really, I know I'm super reducing it, and I know, again, someone's going to clip that and be like, this guy, he doesn't understand Kohelet, he's such a bad, it's like, okay, fine. I'm obviously being, It's not Torah study. It's a book club, so we're kibitzing a little bit. Anyway, I shouldn't talk about Torah while I'm being a kibitzer. The kibitzer Rebbe, that's what they're going to call me because I kibitz too much. Okay. God, I hope nobody watches this online. Okay. Objects of sublime feeling, according to Kant, are bold, overhanging, and, as it were, threatening rocks. Clouds, piled up in the sky, moving with lightning flashes and thunder peals. Volcanoes, and basically what we said before, right? When I was making fun of Kant by saying mountains. Mountains is what he says, basically, right? I mean, I'm sorry. Okay, he's gonna get there. Notice he never actually says mountains. He says everything I said but mountains, but he said volcanoes, and that's basically a mountain. Okay, sorry. Volcanoes in all their violence of destruction, hurricanes with their track of devastation, the boundless ocean. You could throw tornadoes in there too. He doesn't know about tornadoes, but we know about tornadoes here in Kansas, and you could throw tornadoes in there too. The boundless ocean in a state of tumult, the lofty waterfall of a mighty river, right? Something that just makes you pull back and see the enormity of Earth and its topography and its power and how small you are in comparison to that. And you go, wow. And we've all been there. We've all done that. We've all had that. And we've all gone, wow, this is something.
Thank you for enabling me to appreciate.
And that's what we say. And you can even, one of the blessings people say about that is, Maseh Bereshit, right? For the works of creation, thank you for the works of creation. I think anyway. Right. So we very much tie it to this God created this very specific world, which kind of runs into, things developed in a certain way, which actually I think makes it even more wondrous, but I kind of like the intelligent design thing. We don't need to talk about that, but I kind of like the idea. It's like we put all the pieces in play and then it's a sim game. And it's just like, hope this works out. I set everything up right. I hope it goes. I hope I don't have to reboot this. Sorry. I played different games, I guess.
Is it fair to say that you can have a sublime moment and then it goes away, and then it can come back?
Yeah,
it's off and on, and that I've noticed particularly in artworks. But in sunsets, etc. And it's that moment that you can remember.
It's only in a moment. Yeah, it only exists for a moment. It's not permanent in it. That's true. Right. You can look at the volcano and feel it, and then look at the volcano 10 minutes later and not feel it.
Right.
Because it's not something it doesn't live in it. It's not an intrinsic quality that in the way that, like, I often refer to holiness as a type of like radiation, except of course, holiness, like sublimity, well, I don't want to say that exactly because certain things always give off holiness. But what I was going to say about radiation versus sublimity is that sublimity is something you can perceive, but it may not always be giving off in such a way that you always respond the same way to it. So, right, you see the sunset, and to be fair, the sun is always moving. So 10 minutes later, you're not really seeing the same sunset. But when you look at art, it's a little more, because the art doesn't change. But you might have that in one moment, but then never again. Music too, different things. And that requires a lot of different levels of things in your head happening at the same time. Again, I can't quantify any of it for you. I don't know what, I could be Star Trekky and make up terms for your I know those are real, I'm sorry. But like, you could have all kinds of markers, but we don't know that those, as far as we know, one day maybe we'll come up with a way to test for these markers. Who knows? It's in all of our fiction. Right? The Jedi are this. They have a connection to something spiritual outside the realm that everyone else in their galaxy has access to. And at first they were like, ooh, it's spiritual. And then they were like, haha, there are numbers. Sorry. Nobody liked that they added numbers to it. But the point is, there throughout all of our culture, we see there are witch characters, wizard characters, people who have some kind of connection to something supernatural. and not that that exists. I'm not saying that exists. What I'm saying is that's like, to me, that's like a reflection emboldened of something that really does exist, which is kind of a a spiritual sense that kind of does exist in people who develop it. Some people, and it's not everybody. Hence why this story works so well in our popular culture, because we all kind of understand that it's possible that someone might access something on a different level than we perceive things, or that we might at a specific point in time. Anyway, sorry. Now, once again, I'm going way off book.
Book promotes it.
I know, but I'm just like, I shouldn't get it. I shouldn't present ideas as if they're mine. That we'll get to also.
Crucial that we're able to talk about these experiences and validate them.
Well, yeah, we have to talk about it while we're talking about this, but in any event, okay. So he's like, these are these things that's the sublime. The meaning of the sublime and its perception, we believe, was not adequately described in these theories, which is basically what you and I have been saying for the last 45 minutes. Is that there's some truth to what Kant and Burke are saying, but it's clearly not the whole truth. It's clearly influenced, it's clearly missing something, it's clearly not aligned with how we understand the world. So basically he's saying the same thing. He's saying, yeah, that's something, but it's not everything. It's not adequate. So
it's ineffable.
Right. And so sorry, and this is where what I said to you before is what Heschel now says to you, is essentially that it's one thing. And he says, the sublime is not opposed to the beautiful, and must not, therefore, be considered an aesthetic category. The sublime may be sensed in things of beauty, as well as in acts of goodness, and in the search for truth. In other words, sublime encounters so much more than the natural world or art or any of these individual things. But the sublime is in all kinds of things, what we do for each other, and in art and music, and in the natural world. The sublime is this whole overarching thing, and you can't just say that it's it's the beautiful, or it's the massive, or that's very restrictive the way they were putting it. The perception of beauty may be the beginning of the experience of the sublime. In other words, sensing beauty is just one of the levels. As you raise that spiritual quotient, that SQ, you start to go, huh, that's beautiful. Not everyone looks at certain things and goes, I got to think about how that looks, because it makes me feel something, or I'm accessing something about what the artist might have intended, and it makes me think. Not everybody does that. Not that they're less than, not, they just like everyone has a different IQ, everyone has a different EQ and SQ is the idea. It's not, and you can build some of these things, but not, you can't build from 0 to 160, you can't build from nothing to everything. I mean, there's ranges, everybody's different. But for the people who get that, not everybody can do that. Not everybody does that. Some people just look at something and go, okay. To be fair, some of those people sense the sublime in other ways that you don't, maybe. So it's not saying, I don't think, Heschel's not saying that there's some higher class of people who have access to this. Just that perhaps some of us access these things in different ways. Perhaps someone who appreciates classical music, for instance, might be better at sensing the sublime in classical music than me, who has no aptitude for classical music and has never sensed the sublime in it. I certainly believe you can. I just never have. But I have sensed the sublime, seeing a massive valley covered with trees of 50 different colors in Utah. And perhaps, I don't want to keep pointing to Sam, I just know he likes classical music because he composes stuff. But perhaps someone who accesses the sublime through art or music would have a more difficult time accessing the sublime through nature or something, right? The outdoorsy type versus right? We know all these tropes from high school. It's not, but perhaps each of those types has their own way of accessing. So again, I'm not at all suggesting that there are certain people with high spiritual quotients who are better than other people and able to act. Like, that's not what I'm trying to say. Just that there are different ways in which they access it, and that not every way might be for everybody, and not everything will do it for every person at the same moment in time. Even the classical music enthusiast might not always feel the sublime in classical. It's not like it's not like it's not, it doesn't work that way. Anyway, I'm glad I got that on the record, because I'm worried people will watch this back and be like, I think he thinks there are special people out there that have super access to, maybe it's, I'm not even going to say that. We'll get demonetized on YouTube. We'll be the first synagogue to get demonetized for talking about Jewish people. Okay. If I haven't gotten demonetized yet and you can still see this video, we're going to continue. Sorry, I say that we're not monetized on YouTube, so we can't get demonetized. We don't make any money. We've got like 100 followers. We're not. I do this sometimes with you all in a meta way, as if we've got like 10,000 people watching it on a live stream, which would be awesome, folks, if you want to share, like, and subscribe. But is never the case. We get like 20 people watching it, which is still good. I'm happy about it, but like, it's not like we're not in the tens of thousands. It's not. We're not Joe Rogan yet. We're not there. We're going to be the liberal Joe Rogan, folks. It's going to be us. It's going to be the Torah study at Temple Beth Shalom. No one's going to see it coming.
Yeah, okay. A wonderful way to raise money.
If only, right? Right. It's like the people out there, maybe join the channel. No, we don't. I don't think we even have that enabled. I don't think you can even give us money if you wanted to. Although we'd probably be smarter to do it. Okay. So the perception of beauty, blah, 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 blah. The sublime is that which we see and are unable to convey, which we said back at the beginning of this thing, essentially. It is the silent illusion of things to a meaning greater than themselves. Also a very good metaphorical phrase for suggesting what it is. It is that which all things ultimately stand for. The inveterate silence of the world that remains immune to curiosity and inquisitiveness, like distant foliage in the dusk. Isn't that interesting? Have you had that, what he's referring to here, the feeling he's trying to get you to access in the inveterate silence of the world that remains immune to curiosity and inquisitiveness, like distant foliage in the dusk? It's okay if you haven't. I only think I have, but I could be wrong. That's how ineffable it is. Sometimes you do, and you don't even know. Because if you've only felt it like once, it's really hard to put a finger on exactly whether you did or didn't. It's kind of like when it's kind of too dark for your eyes to adjust to the sight line. You know how your eyes automatically adjust to the horizon so that you can tell the difference between what's above and below any sight? If you focus on it, I assume your eyes do it too. I'm not a superhuman or something, but we're designed so that we can do this. And normally you should be able to tell, but when the grass meets the bushes and the trees and it's dusk and it's kind of too dark for your eyes to do that, there's kind of a part of the world between where the grass and the bushes meet and the tree, that you kind of can't see, and your eyes kind of give up on it. They kind of go, like, it's out there. Something's out there. You get it. It's trees, it's grass. That's I think what he's alluding to is this. No matter how much you try and look at it, that's why it's immune to curiosity and inquisitiveness. You won't be able to adjust to it, even though you normally always can. But there's this moment again, it gets to what we were talking about how these things happen in moments. It won't be forever because it'll eventually get dark and your eyes will adjust to the darkness and you'll see at least a little bit. I mean, as much as humans do. We're not cats. But you'll see a little bit, or it's light enough and your eyes will just boop, I see there's trees, there's bushes, there's grass. I see it. It's light. Right? But there's a point, a moment he's referring to in the dusk where you can't do that. And no amount of you trying to see will yield the answer. Your eyes just won't see it. You'll look and not see, which is very discombobulating, as I used that word earlier about the spiritual, the kind of that's I think what he's referring to is this moment. Try it sometimes. Go out when it starts to get tonight at like 2:00. No, I'm just kidding. But when it starts to get dark, go out and look at if you've got a tree line somewhere, or go to a park or something. I don't know. And just look from about 40, 50 yards away at the tree line and where the grass and the trees and the bushes and all that meet. And as it gets darker, keep looking at it. And eventually this will happen. There will come a time, I think, again, I think this has happened to me before, where it's kind of impossible to tell where the line split, where that breaks. And that's what he's talking about. He's just trying to get you to access that. Because most people who've spent time outdoors have experienced this. I don't know if any of you have, but if you have, you can talk about it or not. It's up to you.
I was going to say, not so much with that experience at dusk, but with moments that you do experience the sublime. This piece probably comes after it, but you try to make sense of your experience.
Yeah.
And you say, I accept, I can't understand it. I can feel it, I can appreciate it, I can't understand it, and I don't need to. I trust and I have faith.
Yes, I agree that that's generally that is my stages of sublimity as well. I agree with that because again, it's something I can tell. I also you go, what was that? How did I access that? And then you realize as it fades, you go, it's just one of those things. Like I'm not going to be able. You can't, like a dream that you barely remember. You're not going to be able to claw it back, claw the feeling back, claw the space you were in back. It just goes. And with that, you go, okay, that was something. That was an experience. I certainly recognize that was different, but also it is gone. And you're good with. I mean, I've also always just generally reached equilibrium spiritually again after a little bit. It kind of throws you off a little bit, and then you kind of go back to an equilibrium, and you're like, okay, I'm just gonna go about my day. I mean, it's like I gotta go to the next thing at camp or whatever. Whatever you're doing, you gotta. It happened to me once at camp when this exact thing. So I have this visceral memory of it.
Kohelet, eat your food, live a good life, drink your wine.
Right.
But you've been touched. You've been in some ways transformed.
Well, I'm not sure. It's interesting because I'm not sure because that's where it's just one of those words, transform, that I think we all experience this. Not too many times, and there are some people who probably experience it more than others, and I don't know what to make of that. I'm not making any pronouncements. I don't think I'm one of them. I've had it like a couple times in my life. It's not, I don't think, more than anybody else. But some people's report, and again, you can never tell if someone's telling the truth because there's no blood test for this, right? You can't go to the hospital and say, can you run my markers for I need to see if I have too much cholesterol and whether I had an attack of the sublime. Like there's no way to do that. So you just take people's word for it. But I do hear people who have it more often, and maybe they do. But I don't think of it as a transformation. I think of it as just it's like it's an opportunity to engage with the fullness of the world. Is more how because you've had that experience, you can think about it, you can think back on it, and try and work that brain, philosophize, use reason, use the things God gave you to try and internalize it in some way, and that is a choice you have. Then again, some people do experience the sublime in terrible ways. It should be noted, which we're not going to get that into, I don't think, here. But I would argue the sublime is also in some of the most, it's also quite frankly why people go see horror movies. Because some people, it, they want to work out this side of their SQ, of their um, flight, essentially, response. They want to be scared. And that fear is also can be sublime in the worst, terrible way. If you want to call it something else because it's the reverse of, if you want sublime to only be good, we can try and do what Burke and Kant did, which is separate. That's what they did, right? They were like, well, there's a fear, massive volcanoes will hurt you, sublime, and then there's a beautiful, small, oh, look at this orchid, isn't it? Right? They're that's what they're getting at, is that there's a good and a bad. That's why I said yin and yang, but to kind of convey the idea that there's a light and a dark, hence masculine and feminine. Because again, I use masculine and feminine for what they were saying, because they don't believe that the masculine one is always bad, just that it contains the bad elements, or many of the bad elements of sublimity. Does that make sense?
Is it fair to say, Laura and I have both worked with the negative side is just as important as the positive to become a whole person. And just walling it off doesn't necessarily take it away.
No, of course.
Experiencing and having a full person. In fact, we just talked about how Abraham did that on his way to sacrifice Isaac, according to the Kabbalah.
And the whole person thing is very important, because that's where we're disagreeing with Kant and Burke.
Right.
Whereas they have divided it into the two, we're saying essentially it's really all a part of one thing in a way. But I'm just trying to, I say all that to remind you that it's not all, like, we're talking about the good encounters we've had with it. I promise you we could find people who've had sublimely terrible experiences, if you want to use whatever term you want to use for that. Awful. I mean, that would be nice, since he uses awe. You could use awful as, I'm sorry, that's a little glib. But there are people who've had really, who've experienced the horror of the world in a way that probably is, if not transformational, then then certainly impacts how you internalize the world. I am impacted by my experiences with the sublime in immense, ineffable ways. I can only assume that's true for others in different ways. That, again, it's an assumption. I could be making an ass of myself, but I don't think so in this case. Other cases, definitely.
When I use the word transformational,
Sure.
I think what I'm trying to get at is my world, my universe has been enlarged. It's been changed.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, there's kind of a personal growth is kind of what I'd rather call that.
Yeah.
Just not because of anything other than when we get into terms like transformation in the religious sense and the spiritual sense, I want to save that word for much different, for different, me personally, I want to save that word for different circumstances. But yes, I do believe that every encounter you have with this leads to growth as you internalize it. And even if it's negative, it can even lead to positive growth sometimes. I know that's not cool to say anymore, that bad experiences, you can, that people used to say all the time, at least I'm sure for you all, but also when I was growing up, that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. The idea was generally that even bad experiences can be learned from and grow, and you can grow and become better because of them. And I do actually believe that's true with the sublime. It's possible. That doesn't mean it will. It can break you too. I'm not saying any of it can. There are people who get really into when they do all kinds of things to access their spiritual side. Aaron Rodgers likes ayahuasca. Sorry, I can't talk about drugs on the YouTubes, and I'm not suggesting you do it, by the way. Don't do drugs. But there are people who go too far trying to access the sublime in certain ways. And so I would say there's good and bad that exists in all of these things, different proportions, admittedly. I'm not going to say that the bad things are just as good and just as bad as seeing a sunset. That's ridiculous. I wouldn't do that. But there can be good that can be drawn with pain, unfortunately, out of bad experiences. Not that they should never, no one should ever have a bad experience, plus for shalom. But like Kohelet would also tell you, like, that's kind of unreasonable to say. Like, when you say God, no one should have a bad experience, God goes, are you running for Miss America? Like, what is your, like, no one should ever have a bad, like, he's like, in all of human history, no one should have ever had a bad time. He's like, what can I do? Like, I think God would be like, what do you want from me for this? Like, I can't, you're asking, that's what the rabbis warn against when they say you shouldn't do audacious bakashot. Your prayers to God shouldn't be audacious. You shouldn't ask for things it's not in your purview to ask for. Which is why they give you the 19 blessings of the Shemona Esrei, because they're like, better for you to do the ones we laid out for you. These are kosher. You can do these, and they're not audacious. But if you start going off on your own, maybe you got cool stuff to say, and God will like it. But the rabbis warn you, they're like, you could also ask for something you're really not supposed to. God, please make me, sorry, I'm not really asking, but you could ask God, to make you a millionaire or something, God forbid. Mm-hmm. Don't do that. That's an audacious thing to ask. Why should you ask for such a thing? That you should be a millionaire. Maybe you are, and wonderful. Good for you. It's that God doesn't say you shouldn't be a millionaire. Being very clear for the internet. Only that you shouldn't ask God to make you one. And I think everyone can kind of get why that sounds audacious. And there are many things that are audacious requests, even ones that sound nice, but would be audacious. You would be condemned by the rabbis for asking for, because it's not your place and it's not right and it's not fair. I would want to intervene on behalf of everyone I know and love, and everyone on earth wants to do that. And if you've seen the movie, which one was it? I think it was the first one, Bruce Almighty. Was that the first? There were the two movies. Yeah, Bruce Almighty was the one with Jim Carrey. And then Steve Carell was in the next one, Evan Almighty. And the second one was like about environmentalism or something. But the first one was about how Bruce Almighty I'm going to get YouTube for this too, for describing the movie. But Bruce Almighty was a guy. Bruce was a guy. He was a weatherman in Buffalo. And I don't know, he wanted to make anchor or something. No, he wasn't. The other guy was the weatherman. He was a reporter or something, wanted to be the anchor. They gave the job to the weatherman, which is the Evan guy. Steve Carell is in the next movie. Sorry, you're not going to see the movies. You don't care. But the point is, Bruce gets really upset, and then he breaks up with his girlfriend because he's on a spiral, and he asks God to intervene, and then he gets hit by a truck, and it's raining and stuff. Mm-hmm. And he meets with God, who in the movie is Morgan Freeman. This was at the beginning of using Morgan Freeman for everything that is, but he does a great job. And the God character says to Jim Carrey, to Bruce, he says, "Okay, you do it. It's easy, right? You think it's easy. You do. You make divine. You do theodicy. You do divine justice. You take in all the requests." And so, of course, the first thing that happens is he needs to organize, because the voices are in his head all the time, because people are always asking God for something. So at first he asks for Post-its, and the whole house fills up with. It's a great scene and the whole thing is covered in Post-its, because instantly everyone's asking God. So then he comes up with, because again, this is like 2004, so it's like, what's new? Computers. So he comes up with an email system where all the requests come in via email. And throughout the movie, they check in with that. And at one point he sees it and says, you know what? Set all to yes. Just accept everyone. Every request that comes in gets it. And all kinds of terrible things happen, as you can expect. Something like 1 billion people win the lottery, so everyone wins 20 cents. And they riot for some reason. I'm not really sure. I think the team also wins, like, I'm not sure. Like, every team wins and loses. I'm not even sure. Like, I don't really remember. But the point is, that obviously is a bad way to do theodicy. You can't give that's not the way it's going to work. And so if that's not the way it's going to work, how does it? Then, well, not even how does it, but you have to accept that means sometimes you're going to ask for something you cannot have. And it's sometimes, even if what feels fair to you, the message of the movie, essentially, from the God perspective is, what feels fair to you may be different from another perspective. This is what I took from it anyway. Mm-hmm. I'm sure it's about love or something. I don't know. But my point is, sometimes there are things you ask for that you probably shouldn't, and not everybody wins. Is another thing in the movie that I think is if not liminal, then subliminal message, is that you're gonna win sometimes and you're gonna lose sometimes, and that's life. Sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. Sometimes Bruce wins, and he wins in the end because he takes responsibility for himself and he does a better job and he gets he gets the girl back, and but he does all those things not because at first he tries to do it by giving the girlfriend a Ferrari because he can make a Ferrari appear out of, like he tries to do magic tricks essentially because that's what, right, he thinks that's what God would do. He would win her back with magic tricks and get his better job by making the other guy speak gibberish on camera so he gets fired, right? Like, I mean, that's what he does first, and he realizes that's Hevel, right? Hakol Hevel Hevelim is what Kohelet says. He goes, this is nothing. This is cars and jobs. What are we doing here? Anyway, it is a good movie. But the the point of all that, I guess, is that there are two sides to everything. There are more sides to things than more than two, probably. And if there are 70 faces of the Torah, then there's got to be at least two sides to everything. And also that when to go back here to this idea of this thing you cannot see or sense, it's okay to accept, which is what, going back to before I ranted at you for 20 whole minutes, to what Lauren was saying about that you just kind of accept these things after they pass over you. That is good. That's what you should want, because that way you can internalize something well and learn and grow from it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not being transformed. I know that's the word that got us off course, but my fault, not anybody else's. But that you can grow from these things, whether they're good or bad. We'll finish this. Oh man, I'm just going to go through this and then we can finish talking about this section. There's a little bit left. It is that which our words, the bottom down here, our forms, our categories can never reach. This is why the sense of the sublime must be regarded as the root of man's creative activities in art, thought, and noble living. I like this idea that like there's some inner goodness to like those who have tried to like there's an art to how one lives, and I'm assuming I don't know who he thinks is the best at it, but I just like the idea that there's the art of noble living, and noble living. Just as no flora has ever fully displayed the hidden vitality of the earth, so has no work of art, no system of philosophy, no theory of science ever brought to expression the depth of meaning, the sublimity of reality in the sight of which the souls of saints, artists, and philosophers live. Doesn't address these exceptional, just like you can experience an exceptional moment, it doesn't explain these exceptional things that happen in the world or with individual, whatever. It doesn't explain Mozart or Shakespeare. You can't reproduce a Mozart or Shakespeare, right? From just saying, well, if we just teach him the way we taught Shakespeare, or if we just get him playing piano from the age of 2 months, like Mozart, you know what I mean? Like, if we just do that, every sports in America, half the families here have tried it with sports and stuff. Can we make our kid a superstar that makes millions of dollars a year? Guess what? You can't do that. Some of them can benefit from the more money you spend on their training and development, and certainly they'll have a big leg up. But I mean, we were watching the football game last night. I don't know if any of y'all watched the football game last night. We were watching the Ravens are the last team I'm rooting for. Commanders have been out for many weeks. The Chiefs are obviously out. I'm rooting for the Ravens since I lived in Maryland and went to school in Baltimore. And the Ravens won their game last night. And they did it because they have a 6'2", 230-pound running back who runs as fast as a little guy would run, a smaller, lighter guy would run. And because of that, his strength and speed, it's unique. And he ran for like 200 yards and 4 touchdowns because he's special. Now, you could train me the way he trains, carrying chains up hills and eating the perfect nutrition, and I'm never running for 200 yards and 4 touchdowns in an NFL game. Not even if I was 20. Not even if I was at the peak of my or 25, whatever the peak of my physical training could have been, and he's 32 now and just a couple years younger than me and doing, I could never have, because I'm not Derrick Henry. And that's okay. But that's kind of the point here, is that there's the exceptionalism does exist, but it's not it can't be predicted in any way. The sublime, furthermore, is not necessarily related to the vast and the overwhelming in size. So it's not necessarily that sublime equals huge. Sublime can also be the beautiful, right? It can be the small. It may be sensed in every grain of sand, in every drop of water, every flower in the summer, every snowflake in the winter may arouse in us the sense of wonder that is our response to the sublime. To me, the meanest flower that blows can give thoughts that do often lie too deep for tears, which is William Wordsworth. A sense of sublime, of something, a sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of setting suns, and the round ocean and the living air, and the blue sky, and in the mind of man, a motion and a spirit that impels all thinking things, all objects of all thought, and rolls through all things. Again, William Wordsworth. Interesting, by the way, he's picking these poetry and not, I mean, again, I could pick, there's Kohelet that works here. There's Jewish texts that work here, but Heschel's not using them. But it will make it may make it easier for you to understand, and it will certainly make it more accessible to a 1950s audience than using the Jewish texts would be. But he does use Jewish texts. Any thoughts? All right, well, I want to thank our friends on YouTube for joining us, and I hope you will join us again for many more of these. And again, maybe you can make us into a streaming power.